Planet Reddit. Today's story is...
My husband cheated on me for 8 months. But when I found out who the other woman was, my life completely fell apart. The truth is unforgivable. Hello, everyone. I'm Eva. I'm 30 years old. And today I want to share with you the story of my life, or what used to be. About a week ago, my 32-year-old husband Roderick went out on one of his regular business trips. As a sales executive, these week-long trips were quite normal for him. This time he told me he was going to Jalfur, Connecticut. I didn't think anything was wrong, so I didn't think much of it. But everything changed 3 days ago when my friend Miranda called me. She lives in Los Angeles, and by chance, she ran into my husband at a local bar. Yes, my husband was in Los Angeles, not in Jalfur, Connecticut as he had told me. She saw him with another woman. When Miranda confronted him, he said she was a colleague and they were there on business. However, immediately after Miranda saw them, they both hurried out of the bar, as if they had been caught doing something wrong. Miranda called me straight away. "Hey, Eva, I just saw Roderick in LA with another woman." I asked her if she was completely sure, if maybe she had seen someone who looked like him. But no, she was convinced. She even took a photo as proof. The image wasn't very clear, somewhat blurred, and the woman's face was not clearly distinguishable, but Roderick was clearly visible. It was definitely my husband, the same one who had assured me he was in Connecticut. I reacted immediately, trying not to overthink the situation. Perhaps there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe his work had unexpectedly taken him to Los Angeles at the last minute. But if that were the case, why didn't he tell me that very night? When Roderick called me, he sounded normal, as if everything was in order. Then, as if it were an unimportant detail, he casually mentioned, "Oh, by the way, I ran into Miranda in Los Angeles." I immediately asked him, "What are you doing in Los Angeles?" And then the justifications began. He said, "Oh, yeah, well, the plan suddenly changed. My boss sent me here at the last minute. He was so busy that he didn't have time to let you know." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But something about the whole situation didn't add up. It was as if he were reciting a rehearsed script, as if he had practiced that explanation before calling me to sound convincing. Then I remembered something important. A few weeks ago, he had made another business trip to Briar, Connecticut. At the time, I didn't think much of it either, but now I had a disturbing feeling. I did something I wouldn't normally do. I checked our credit card statements. And what I found confirmed my suspicions. I had made purchases in Los Angeles during that same week. He had been lying to me, not only this time, but on at least one previous occasion. This confirmed to me that it wasn't simply an unexpected business trip. I wasn't in Los Angeles by chance. I had specifically gone to see that woman, the same person, on 2 separate occasions. I went back further in the statements and discovered that almost half the times she said she was on business trips in Connecticut, she was actually in Los Angeles. This situation had been going on for approximately 8 months. Sleeping that night seemed impossible with all this new information. I kept checking my phone, analyzing our credit card transactions, looking for more evidence. I examined his social networks, the emails he had access to, his work calendar. I wasn't even sure what exactly I was looking for at that moment. Probably more confirmation, more reasons to suffer. And then, as I felt everything collapse around me, I remembered another significant detail. Roderick had deactivated the location sharing function. He never did that. We always shared our locations with each other, not for control but for safety. If he traveled, I liked to check that he had landed safely. If I went out late, he liked to make sure I got home safely. But he had deactivated that option, and I hadn't realized it until now. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. Roderick would be back in just 2 days, and I felt that the time to make a decision was running out fast. The only thing I was clear about was that I didn't want to be there when he came back. I wasn't willing to listen to another made-up excuse or empty apology. So I did the only thing I thought was appropriate. I packed all my belongings, literally everything I owned, and made a decision. I went straight to my parents' house, which fortunately was only half an hour away. I needed to take temporary refuge there with people who could protect me from this whole situation. However, before leaving, I wanted to make sure that he could not deny what I had done. I printed out our credit card statements, highlighting all the charges made in Los Angeles. I also printed out the blurry photograph that Miranda had taken. Although the quality was not great, I was sure that he would recognize it perfectly. The image of that woman remained clear in my memory. I can't blame Miranda for the quality of the photo. She was quite a distance away when she took it. I left all this evidence on the dining room table, like a time bomb waiting to be discovered. I didn't even leave an explanatory note. Honestly, I didn't know what I would have written anyway. Maybe something like, "Hey, I know you're a liar and you've been cheating on me. I'm leaving. I left you last night's leftovers in the fridge." Yesterday, Roderick returned from his trip and started calling me incessantly. He must have tried to contact me at least 10 times during the first few hours. Honestly, I found it pathetic. After everything that had happened, did he really think I would answer as if nothing had happened? I refused to answer. I didn't even want to hear his voice. I temporarily turned off my phone to get some peace and quiet. I knew he was probably desperate, but frankly, I didn't care. I needed time to breathe, to think and not to feel overwhelmed by the whole situation. I constantly think about all the time we've been together. I was so sure of him, and now I feel like I don't even really know him. He's been my husband for 5 years, and I never imagined he was capable of something like this. But I guess that's what every person who suffers infidelity thinks. My mother insists that I should at least listen to him once, if only to get some definitive closure. Should I take his call? Should I allow him to explain himself, or should I just keep my distance and be firm in my decision? Update 1. My attempts to avoid Roderick didn't last long, and I'm surprised they even persisted for that long. A day after posting my last update, he showed up at my parents' door. I thought he would respect my space and wait for me to contact him, but he didn't. He stood there, visibly upset, and refused to leave until I listened to him. At first, I doubted whether he really wanted to hear what I had to say, but he insisted that I needed to hear his explanation. I refused to let him in and told him to explain himself from the doorway. I was prepared for the same lies and manipulation, but what he revealed to me took me completely by surprise. He began by saying that the whole thing had started a year ago during one of his work conferences. Apparently, he met this woman there, a work colleague or something similar, and they exchanged phone numbers. He mentioned that they began to communicate, initially casually, but over time the conversations became more personal. He said they kept in touch after the conference, and that's when the relationship intensified. He went on to say that he didn't even realize when he crossed that line. He described the whole situation as if it were a simple, innocent oversight, as if one circumstance led to another and it wasn't really his responsibility, or as if that diminished the seriousness of his actions. But we are talking about an adult capable of making his own decisions, and those decisions led him to this moment. He tried to convince me that it was only physical, that it didn't mean anything more. He kept saying that the relationship was over, supposedly on the same day that Miranda sent me the photograph. That would be too big a coincidence, something I definitely couldn't believe. I replied, "Firstly, this doesn't make things any better. Not one bit. You've been lying to me for a year, Roderick. And you would have carried on doing it if Miranda hadn't seen you, so you can save all your explanations. And secondly, do you expect me to believe that you have been traveling to Los Angeles every month just for physical encounters? How long do you think I'm going to accept that? It was one thing to have been unfaithful during these months. It was quite another to treat me as naive and keep making up excuses that would get us nowhere." I told him clearly that there was no going back. I didn't care if he was sorry, if he felt bad, or if one situation led to another. That was no longer relevant. Just as one circumstance led to another and ended up betraying our relationship, one thing led to another, and now I would be asking him for a divorce. And I told him bluntly, "You will soon be hearing from my divorce lawyer." After hearing that word, he began to cry inconsolably in the doorway, but I told him that the visit was over and it was time to leave. I had already said everything I had to say, which I was completely indifferent to, so that concluded our conversation. Now I just need to find a divorce lawyer, because I obviously don't have one, as I've never needed one before. You could say that I lied about having a lawyer, but it will only be for a few days until I find someone suitable to represent me. Update 2. So much has happened in the last month that I haven't had the time or mental energy to sit down and write here. But I think you too will feel overwhelmed when you finish reading this update. I will try to be concise, but I want to share as many details as possible. I was working with my lawyer, whom I had finally found, analyzing the next steps to take, when I received a call from an unknown number. It was Lillian, Roderick's cousin, a woman of about 35 years old. I knew her. We weren't particularly close, but we had met on enough occasions that it didn't feel strange for her to contact me. However, I didn't have her phone number saved, which reflects the level of our relationship. I barely answered. She went straight to the point. She told me that Roderick was truly distraught and that he had come to her house looking for comfort because he was devastated by the whole situation. Really? I understand that he is her relative, but was she really calling me to make me feel sorry for him after everything he had done? After blatantly lying to me, deceiving me, and then trying to minimize it as if it were an insignificant mistake. I was almost amused at how absurd it all sounded, but instead of losing my temper, I took a deep breath and replied, "And I'm supposed to care about that?" She paused, as if waiting for me to add something more. When I didn't, she went on to say that Roderick deeply regretted everything and that he felt completely lost without me, that he cried constantly because he couldn't believe what he had done. At that moment, I simply held the phone up to my ear, absolutely perplexed by what I was hearing. Of course, maybe he really was crying. Maybe he genuinely regretted it. But what did she expect me to do with that information? Give him another chance just because he was now sobbing like a child? I said, "Lillian, I understand you feel bad about this, but he made his choices. He chose to lie, he chose to be unfaithful, and now he must face the consequences." She was silent for a moment, and I thought maybe that would be the end of the conversation. But it wasn't. Then she started to imply that she didn't understand how many difficulties Roderick and I had been facing, that relationships have their ups and downs, and that marriage is not always perfect. My God, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had to close my eyes and count to 5 to avoid losing control. I took another deep breath and replied without ambiguity, "Lillian, this is not something I can get over. It is not a simple misunderstanding. I can no longer trust him, and that destroys any possibility of reconciliation." After saying this, I hung up because there was nothing more to add. I don't know if she understood my position or not, but I didn't want to hear anything more from her. I must confess, I never end phone calls abruptly. I hate to do it. But at that moment, I knew that if I stayed on the line any longer, I would start shouting, and I wasn't going to give her or Roderick that satisfaction. However, I did wonder why her cousin, of all people, would call me to try to sort out Roderick's problems. Perhaps I would have expected it from his parents, who remained completely silent, from a close friend, or anyone else. I pondered this for several days until it occurred to me to check the security cameras at my house from my phone. I started examining recordings from several weeks ago until I found something revealing. And there they were, in my backyard, kissing passionately. Roderick and Lillian. I was immediately repulsed. I mean, they're not brothers, but they're still cousins. I felt nauseous. I really thought I had hit rock bottom with this whole situation, but apparently there was still room to fall deeper. I can't find the words to express how absolutely disgusted I felt at that moment. My whole body shakes just thinking about it now. I was staring at the screen, watching my husband kissing his own cousin in the backyard of our house. I think I stood there, staring at the screen, for a full 10 minutes. It was as if my brain activated a self-defense mechanism, refusing to process what I was witnessing. How was it possible? There had to be some logical explanation, right? Maybe I was so emotionally exhausted that I was misinterpreting the images, having hallucinations. I enlarged the image, rewound it, examined it repeatedly. But no, there was no way I could be mistaken. There was no possible misinterpretation. There was no other viable explanation. Roderick and Lillian were in my backyard, kissing intensely. I felt physically sick. Without exaggeration, I had to run to the bathroom because I thought I was going to throw up. I didn't actually do it, but it took me a considerable time to calm down enough to think clearly. Even so, perhaps I wasn't completely lucid, but I did the only thing I could think of at the time. I immediately sent Miranda a message asking her to confirm something important. "This is extremely urgent." I sent her a photograph of Lillian and asked her if she was the woman I had seen with Roderick in the bar. It took Miranda a few minutes to reply, which seemed like an eternity. I watched the screen, seeing that she was typing, but the message wasn't coming. Finally, she replied in the affirmative, confirming that she was the woman she had seen in the bar, and asked me how I had obtained that photograph, among other things. That's why it took her so long to reply, although it was probably less than a minute in reality. I explained who she was, that Lillian was Roderick's cousin. Miranda's response was exactly what I was thinking and what any reasonable person would think. What the hell? At that moment, I was walking nervously around my parents' house, trying to process what I was supposed to do with this information. Infidelity is one thing, lying is another, but being unfaithful to your own cousin? That represents a completely different level of repugnance for which I was not prepared. How should I justify the divorce now, as infidelity with a family member? I couldn't contain myself. I went straight to our house and started banging on the door. When I arrived, Lillian was the one who opened the door. The audacity of this woman. I could see the guilt on her face, but she still had the nerve to feign surprise at seeing me there, as if she were completely unaware of the reason for my presence. Of course, I was simply an unwelcome guest, interrupting her romantic evening with a married man with whom she was having an inappropriate relationship. For a moment, she stood motionless, frozen. I pushed her aside and went straight in. Roderick was in the kitchen, by the bar, with a glass of whiskey in his hand, as if he were relaxing after probably having carried out improper activities with his cousin. When he saw me, his whole body visibly tensed. He no longer seemed so calm, and at that precise moment I understood. I knew he had been anticipating this confrontation. He knew I would eventually discover the truth, but he was hoping to have more time to come up with some ridiculous excuse. I told him straight out that I knew the whole truth. I told him that I knew Lillian was the woman he had been cheating on me with. Of course, he immediately tried to deny it, as you would expect. He laughed nervously, as if I was unbalanced, as if I was the one making unfounded accusations. I could see him searching for the right words, something that could satisfactorily explain the whole situation. But then I took out my phone, opened the security camera video and showed it to him. He could no longer justify that I was performing CPR on him in the courtyard, especially with her standing there. And at that moment, the whole truth emerged. The absolute, disgusting, horrible truth. This was not just a new love affair. It was not a mistake made in a moment of weakness. No, this relationship had begun long before we met years ago. He and Lillian had been romantically involved long before I came on the scene. But apparently they decided to end it when we got married. And then 2 years ago, they picked up exactly where they had left off. 2 whole years. 2 years of my life wasted on a man who had been intimate with his own cousin. I was on the verge of throwing up, even though I was still in my own stomach. I felt physically sick. I simply waited for him to finish his explanation, turned around and left. It has taken me several days to write all this down because every time I started I was overcome with such revulsion that I doubted whether I would be able to continue much longer. On one occasion, I even nearly threw up on the floor. I don't know how many people are aware of this situation, and I'm not sure whether I should disclose it or not. This partly explains why I summoned the courage to write something that disgusts me so much to find out what you think about it. Update 3. This update comes less than a month after the last one, but it's been an intense 2 weeks that bring me here with a lot to share. After confronting Roderick, I felt incredibly furious, so angry that I couldn't keep still. I wasn't even completely sure what my next step should be, but one thing was clear. I wanted to do something that would make him feel at least a fraction of what I was experiencing. Revenge, I guess. It sounds extreme, but at that moment, I felt like I needed some kind of justice. Instead of sitting around letting my mind wander, I just got in my car and drove to his parents' house. I'm not proud of going straight to them, but at the time I felt they deserved to know the truth. Roderick's parents live about 2 hours away, so when I arrived it was almost 7 in the evening. I hadn't planned exactly what I would say to them. I mean, how do you explain something like this? How do you tell people who have treated you like part of the family for years that their son has been having inappropriate relationships with his cousin? I realized immediately that they had no idea what was going on. They knew that Roderick and I were taking some time apart, but that was all. I guess they thought it was just one of those temporary rough patches, not that our relationship was definitely over. They gave me a warm hug when they let me in. We sat down at the kitchen table, and I just revealed the whole truth. I informed them that we were getting a divorce. They kept asking me what had happened because they were completely surprised by what I had just told them, as Roderick hadn't mentioned anything at all. I wasn't sure if I could explain it properly. I told them everything in detail, about the infidelity, about the video of Roderick and Lillian, about how I found out, how I confronted him. The full summary of these posts. I showed them the video, and the look on their faces when they saw it was enough to break anyone's heart. Their mother started crying almost immediately. I'm convinced she felt as betrayed as I did. How could she not feel that way? Her son was on the video with her niece, betraying his wife. Their father remained silent, which I guess was his way of processing all the information. I know he was deeply disappointed. I could see it in his eyes, but initially he didn't say a word. He just looked at his wife, then at me, and then back at the video. His mother, on the other hand, was already asking how she could help me. She expressed how sorry she was for the whole situation, that none of this was my responsibility, and that regardless of what happened, I would always be considered part of their family. It was at that precise moment that I realized how much I would miss them. They had been extremely kind to me, and it was clear that the divorce would distance us. I told them that I still wanted to keep in touch with them, that I didn't want to completely cut ties, no matter what happened with Roderick. I wasn't angry with them. This wasn't their fault at all. We continued talking for a while longer. They kept asking questions. They wanted to understand how long it had all lasted and all the details of the matter. After leaving Roderick's parents' house, I didn't know what to expect. I imagined that maybe they would try to intervene in some way, or at least provide some kind of closure. But as time went by, I received no communication from them. However, I did receive news from Roderick's sister. Roderick's parents are extremely religious, and I knew that if anyone was going to be truly outraged by what had happened, it would be them. They have always been very strict about family values. Then, yesterday, I got a call from Roderick's sister. She wanted to meet with me to talk. Honestly, I wasn't sure I was ready for that, but I agreed. I wasn't expecting any big revelations, but I was curious to hear what she had to say. When we met, he told me that after everything that had happened, the family had had a serious conversation with Roderick. It turns out that his parents were absolutely furious once they got over the initial shock, and they began to reflect seriously on the situation, especially considering Lillian's involvement. They couldn't believe it, he said, as it completely contradicted all the values they stood for. They had tried to make him understand the seriousness of a situation, but he had categorically refused to end his relationship with Lillian. Apparently, his parents were extremely clear about how unacceptable the situation was, but Roderick showed no inclination to end the relationship. I don't know if it's because he really loves her or because he has already lost his marriage and she is all he has left. He firmly told them that he would not stop seeing Lillian. Now, Roderick's family has taken an uncompromising stance. They have officially disowned him. They declared that they could no longer have a relationship with him and expressed their deep regret for everything I was going through. Roderick's sister informed me that the whole family had cut off all communication with both him and Lillian. She told me that even the members of the extended family, whom I don't know so well, were outraged by the whole situation. It has become the family scandal of the moment, given that there are 2 members involved in this unfortunate affair. I guess all that's left is to wait for the divorce to be finalized and to set my husband free to pursue his dream of sharing his life with his cousin like a bad joke. Update 4. The romantic dream with his cousin has vanished from my ex-husband Roderick, along with his marriage, which is now officially dissolved. This would be a good summary for the last few months of my existence. The most significant thing for me, although perhaps the least interesting for you, is that the divorce has been finalized and I have completely distanced myself from the whole situation. I have kept in touch with my ex-in-laws because they have made an effort to contact me throughout the process, asking me how I was and if I needed any kind of assistance. That's why I consider them to be excellent people, as they are capable of recognizing the mistakes made by their son and not supporting him unconditionally simply because the family is the most important thing. I hope never to meet a husband like Roderick again, but I doubt if I will ever find in-laws as understanding as the ones I had. It's not common. Now, as for the romantic dream with my ex-husband's cousin, there is no longer any need to buy plane tickets to escape together. Lillian, after being disowned by her own parents, whose father, by the way, is the brother of Roderick's mother, also decided to end her relationship with him to avoid being completely excluded. So far, it seems like just another love story that fails because of family differences. Only in this case, the differences arose within the same family due to the incestuous nature of the relationship. But her parents were still not satisfied with that decision because it continued to damage the family's reputation, especially theirs as Lillian's parents. So what strategy did Lillian use to distance herself completely? Well, she publicly stated that Roderick had constantly manipulated her all this time. She claimed that he invited her on trips, such as the one to Los Angeles, which were obviously a way of getting her away from anyone who might recognize them, and once there, he would start flirting with her. She supposedly believed that these trips were simply vacations between cousins, but when he started pressuring her, she felt obliged to reciprocate. Over time, she said, she felt trapped in this unhealthy relationship with no possibility of escape, which is why she continued to maintain the bond. And I personally read this because it was published on the internet, until Roderick filed a defamation lawsuit and she was forced to remove it. However, neither her parents nor I believe this fabricated story, so Lillian only faced a lawsuit while Roderick's reputation was completely ruined. They even went as far as to fire him from his company because he has female coworkers, and that kind of behavior towards another woman is not something that makes them feel safe in the workplace. That's how the whole situation ended for Roderick. The consequences have been greater than anyone could have imagined, considering that, at least in our state, it is illegal to marry a relative as close as a cousin. So I don't know what his ultimate purpose was with her. Mine is to get my life back and stay away from anyone who has a romantic interest in their own relatives.